Coming up, we have a keynote about what comes next after a lean startup.
So let's delve into the future of product market launches, the rise of new technologies like GenAI, and emerging business models such as microSaaS. Welcome on the stage, Interim Chief Product Officer Harpal Singh. Round of applause.
Thank you. Zoltan actually in his previous chat covered my entire talk in 2 sentences in his last sentence, which was customer first. That's my whole talk. Anyway, so the topic is lean startup, and what you may see is 2 themes, one being that why you may not need a tech co-founder if you are building an early stage startup, and secondly, why you may not need to build product at all in the early stages. So let's dive in. In 2011, in the startup land, there were 2 concepts that were introduced, one being customer development by Steve Blank, and second being a lean startup from Eric Ries. Steve popularized the concepts like get out of the building, which was a code word for speak to customers, hence the reference to the previous talk. And Eric popularized a number of lean startup concepts that we still use in our vocabulary day to day, like minimum viable product or MVP, build, measure, learn loop, pivoting, viral coefficient. If you spend enough time understanding the concepts that Steve was talking about in his book, it was nothing short of a revelation. It was so deep and so intense. And Eric's lean startup was nothing short of a revolution if you were around to experience that. Coincidentally, in 2011, around 13 years ago, I was also running my own startup at the same time. I launched my startup as an early stage founder. Actually, out of interest, how many people here have launched an idea or launched a startup just based on an idea? Show of hands, please. Quite a few. Yeah, so I was one of those founders, basically had an idea literally one night before going to bed, wrote my idea on a whiteboard in my home office, and next morning started working on the idea because I was so excited about it. And a few months down the line, I actually left my full-time job to work on the idea full-time. Yeah, and so when I was working before my startup, I came from design and agile and product background. So I worked as a designer and a product manager. These concepts of iterative design and development, putting something out there, testing, getting feedback, they were not new to me. So the whole idea of lean was pretty comfortable, and I could get around it. And yet, after 2 years of emotional roller coaster and working on my startup, it came crashing down in 2 years. My startup failed badly. My point being that, one, that starting with an idea probably wasn't the best idea to build a startup. And secondly, even though I kind of had this understanding of all of these iterative concepts, in theory, it's very easy to understand, but very hard to put that in practice. That was the kind of founder story part. So fast forward to now, which is like after 13 years. So we have startup founders using lean principles, speaking to customers. We have better technology. It is easier, faster, and cheaper to build products than ever before. And we have more resources, more VCs, more investors, more of events like TechChill. We have far more resources at hand to make the startup successful, and yet the failure rate of startups remains still so high. Why is that? So there are many reasons for it. What I'll say is like there are 2 underlying forces that impact the success of your startup. One being the conditions and environment in which your startup operates is changing and evolving all the time. So there are macro conditions like COVID or the high interest rate from the last few years. and there are micro conditions which are directly related to your startup and your business or your idea. To give an example, recently I worked for an edtech scale-up out of US. So they have a software, a SaaS software for special education teachers to teach students with severe disabilities or special needs. And given the shortage of teachers in that domain, what schools have started doing is they started moving general education teachers to special education teachers. Now, as a result of that, because now the teachers who are coming, they have less or no experience in special education, it had direct impact on the product and the business, which was actually built for seasoned teachers, and now the product has to work for the teachers who are new to the profession. So this is an example of a micro change which is directly related to your startup, which can impact how the startup will proceed if you know the changes that are happening in the market. The second underlying force is customer expectations. So it's all of us, effectively. Our expectations are always rising. If I take a very simple example of delivery time, let's say. So for anything you order online, and if I say that the delivery is going to take 3 to 4 weeks, it's more than likely that you will say, I'm not buying it. It's not for me, right? We all want things to be delivered faster, few days, few hours, even the next hour or so. So our expectations are always rising, and these are the forces that we are playing with when we are building the startup, and we have to keep in mind. So where does then lean startup fit in all of this when everything is changing all the time? Let's look into it. I'm sure almost all of you have seen a version of this to build the MVP in one shape or another in the last decade or so, and there are hundreds of articles written on it. There are courses as well on that. So this is the MVP approach, where in the first version on the top, you have a product which is practically unusable. You're starting with a wheel. I mean, you can sell the tire for sure, but it's actually an unusable product. In the second version, what you see is there is a different product every single time, from a skateboard to a cycle to a motorcycle, but to cater to the same need, which is going from point A to point B. And in the third example, it is as if you have absolute clear idea of where the product is going to end up, what the end vision is, and you're simply adding the features up to there. In reality, nothing works like that. This is not the right way, and this is a product-first approach. It does not start with customers. And I'll explain more on that, like why this approach is not valid anymore. So when it comes to building a startup, a very typical journey that you may notice is, as founders, we spend way too much time on product upfront. So sometimes this could be as long as 12 months to 18 months. You're just building the product, launching the features, getting the feedback. I mean, it sounds logical. It sounds right. But you end up wasting way too much time to learn what works and what doesn't work. And during that time, your startup may not be alive anymore, right? And once you have a product where it resonates with some customers, then you try to figure out, okay, which is the right customer segment, and then you figure out, okay, how do I find more of those customers? How do I distribute my product? And if you survive the startup in 2 years, then you might think about business model. There is a better way. And a better approach is to flip the equation on its head and focus on the market first instead of the product first. So rather than building first, figure out the market. And by market, I mean customer segments. Understand who your customers are, understand what their real pain is, understand how to find those customers, build some sort of business, solve that problem, and then discover the product as a result of that. So this approach I would call as a market-first approach rather than a product-first approach, where you can get to the same results in terms of a product that works a lot faster. So rather than spending 2 years building the product, you can go to the market faster. Now, why does it happen? Why is it that we just tend to be attracted to building the product all the time? So one is that as humans, we all love to create. So anything we create, we love to see the creation in front of us. It's deeply satisfying to see something we have created and put it out there. And then, sorry to break it to you, like, it's a path of least resistance. It's the easy way. It's the easy option. It's a lot easier to just open your laptop, start coding, and start building the product than actually go out and figure out the right customers and figure out the right business. It's a much harder problem. And then again, like as founders, we have insecurities where we don't want to hear that an idea or a vision that we are dedicating our lives to is actually not needed in the market, right? So I think these are things like why we fall for it, but the right approach is to focus on market first. Now, what does it really mean to focus on market first? What I do is I use this kind of three set of guiding principles to help with that approach. One being, again, understanding your customers quite deeply. Second being learning fast, reducing waste. And third being using a scientific approach. To describe briefly, so again, like founders are already spending time to learn about their customers. And from what I have seen is it remains at a quite high and a superficial level. And what you need to do is go a level deeper. You need to understand your customers' wants, needs, behaviors. Why do they do certain things? How are they currently solving the problem? What are those problems? How intense are those problems? So you need to be a domain expert in your customer problems. That's when you realize you have the deep insights that your competitors may not have. As Jeffrey Moore from Crossing the Chasm says, you can outsource or buy almost everything when it comes to your startups, but you can't buy customer understanding. That is what you have to do as a founder. You need to be very, very close to your customer. Nothing else matters more in my view. Secondly, it's about learning fast and reducing waste. I'm sure you have heard about reducing tech waste, which is you have built a technology product for, I don't know, like 9 months or so, only to find out it doesn't work, which is more common than you may realize. There is another aspect of it, which is called learning waste. So you may spend, I don't know, like, let's say 3 months building an MVP, like we showed before, and to learn something which could have been learned by just conducting 5 interviews in a single day. That's the learning waste. And time is of essence when it comes to your startup. So the message here is to learn fast. Figure out what you need to learn about your customers, about your market, and what's the best way to build that understanding. I can tell you, like, the speed of your learning will determine the speed of your execution, and as a result, your success as a startup. So it's really important to focus on learning fast, not building fast, right? It's not about building, it's about figuring out what works for the market. Then by the scientific approach, what I really mean is to not be a scientist in a white lab coat and running experiments all day. What I really mean is that validating every aspect of your startup. Again, you may do that for product features, you may do that for technology, but you can also do that for vision, as an example. So you might think like, oh, I have this vision for my startup, this is what I'm going to build in 3 years' time. But in reality, if you have noticed the startups that have succeeded, more than 50% of them completely change the idea that they started with. Their vision completely changes. So a vision is pulled out of you by the market based on the feedback you're getting. So you start with a hypothesis, you validate each and every aspect of your startup. So how do you make it work? So that was like how to think about market first, but how do you actually put that in practice? So you may have used a similar loop from like for building products, like build, measure, learn. This is not further from that, but here in this kind of market first approach, you are starting with a hypothesis. You are testing that hypothesis by figuring out what's the right way to test, and then you're learning and applying those learnings, and kind of a loop continues effectively, right? So the hypothesis here is a reflection of your business and market. And some examples of kind of forming that hypothesis is a hair on fire problem, which is effectively a problem so intense for your customers and so important that their hair is on fire and they're like ready to give you the money to solve that problem for them. So that's like a hair on fire problem. You can you can build your hypothesis with the highest risk. Like, what's the biggest risk that could kill your startup? Right? That could also help you build the hypothesis. Of course, you can start with your vision as well, because what is a vision? It is something you believe that you want to put out in the world, a thing you want to create, and by definition, it's an assumption that you want to test out in the market. So that's another example to start with a hypothesis. So does that mean the MVP is dead? So if you consider MVP as a minimum set of features or product features that you're launching publicly just to kind of get some feedback on that, then I would say it's not as relevant as it was a decade ago, right? I also don't believe the concept of you should be embarrassed about your first product applies anymore. I know people are still talking about it. But it doesn't mean MVP is dead. What MVP here is, it's a representation of your business and market hypothesis. Something you are starting with, something you need to test with. So if a hypothesis around customer segments, then that's what you're starting with, and you're looking for the best way to test. And the best way may not be building product. That's the key message in this one, right? It's always kind of focus on customers, start with the market. The market pulls the product out of you, if you know what I mean. To give you a few examples on like how to put this in practice, so let's take a B2C and a B2B example. In the first B2C example, let's say you are a founder building a dating app for people in their 40s or 50s, and your hypothesis is that you have figured out their dating needs are quite different from the mass market, and the current dating apps don't work for them. So in the product-first approach, as a founder like me, you will get excited about the idea and start building it then very next day, a prototype for a dating app, and you might take it out to the right customers and take some feedback, and it will give you some improvements, and it sounds all logical and good, right? But it is a slower, very slow approach. By the time you figure out, your startup may not be alive. So a market-first approach in this case is you build an offline, let's say, and there are many ways to do this, by the way. So one of the approaches, you build an offline version of a dating, where you go for bring together people in your vicinity or in your city with the same demographic. You do some matchmaking, and you kind of get to a level where you make some successful matches. Now, as a result of that, what it will give you is a deep understanding of what the needs and desires and behaviors of that customer segment is. What is it that they are looking for? How do they think about their partner? What are their needs? And after making, let's say, successful matches, you would know what product to build. Compared to if you started the product earlier, just based on an idea or just high-level understanding of the market, that will never be as good as actually working with them and making successful matches, right? So that's the market-first approach. You still build a product, but you don't start with the product. The second example is a B2B. This applies to all types of startups, even the AI startups. And if you're interested, I can explain you later on that. So let's take this example slightly related to AI. So let's say you are a B2B founder building a meeting analysis tool for legal firms. And your hypothesis is that legal firms spend a ton of time transcribing their meetings, summarizing their meetings, preparing in a special format the documentation that they have, right? And again, as a founder, you might jump on the idea and say, wow, there's a lot of text here. There's a huge opportunity for GenAI, and I'm going to build an NLP and an AI, GenAI-based prototype, which is natural language processing and generative AI. And you might think that you can create a prototype which can demonstrate that feature to summarize the text, and you can demonstrate the efficiency gains as a result of that. Again, sounds very logical. That's why we fall for it. But that doesn't mean it will work. Instead, you can take a market-first approach again. And what you could do is, just an example, you could sign up legal firms. Offer what you want to offer as a product as a service instead. So sign up the firms, take the audio files from them for their meetings, do the transcriptions yourself, get paid for it, have 10 to 15 paying customers, and then again you will figure out what their needs are, how they work. You will understand their workflow quite deeply, which is the most important point in this case, right? You may not have that understanding of workflow in how the legal firm works and behaves without being there, without working with them. So market-first approach puts you right in the center of the action with the customers. So you learn from there and kind of solve and build the product from that perspective. So you don't take the product-first approach. Now, where does AI fit into all of this? What's the impact of AI? So we talked about the 3 guiding principles, one being kind of focus on your customers, learning fast, and then taking a scientific approach. Then we talked about the loop for the market-first approach, which was build a hypothesis, test it, and learn it. Simply put, AI will accelerate each and every aspect of this process. You can learn faster, you can build your hypothesis faster, you can gain understanding of the market faster, and it can be applied in every part of the process. Wrapping it up, what I believe is that AI puts lean startup on steroids. What you are doing, you can do it a lot more faster. And I also believe that, this is from Sam Altman, by the way, I also believe the same thing, which is we will see a one-person billion-dollar company in near future because of AI in our lifetime, in the next few years or so. And I sure as hell hope that's a woman. Thank you very much.